Pushing the limit of what was done before is human nature. Pushing boundaries is the nature of art. And art is hard to define, classify, and attempt to denounce things as not. Which leads us to some of the most depraved thoughts and visuals translated onto the motion screen. This is a deep dive into extreme horror.
Depravity and perversion.
Taking a quick glance at me, you could probably not be surprised that extremities are something that piques my personal interest. And it is undeniable that a big driving force within artistic creation is pushing extremes. And where can you push more extremes than horror? From splatter films to just pure out torture films on screen, there's a morbid peak of interest for all of just how gross and gruesome is that movie, really? And of course, I will be discussing movies that push extremes outside of blood, guts, and gore, because extreme horror is not just that. And I'm gonna beat you to skipping ahead. I will be discussing some of the heavy hitters with, a mysterious aura around them, as much as I would rather not chat about them. I will be discussing Serbian and Salo at the end of this video to spare a lot of you from that if you do not wish to. But with that, as you saw, there was a warning before this video, and here is my secondary warning before I start getting into the nitty-gritty details. I'm going to be discussing things that push extremes, violence, SA, CSAM, kinda anything that could possibly upset a person. If you are sensitive to anything around this, or you feel like you don't know, I urge you to click off. Do not force yourself to watch or see content that will upset you. There is nothing good to gain out of that. If this is something that is not for you, do not worry about that. I will see you in the next video. Please take care of yourself. Go do something that makes you happy. Go watch content that makes you happy. Okay? And with that, as always, I must give you your history lesson. Now, extreme horror would actually take place before the motion major pictures of film. And this would be in France with the theater group of the Grand Journal in 1897. A normal performance would be about 5 to 6 plays following the naturalistic ideals of the group. The plays that gave them the most notoriety and fellowship were their horror plays, which focused on pessimism ideals and bloody, gory effects at the climax of the story. Contrary to most horror happening at the time, the Grand Journal stayed away from things like ghosts or ghouls or any supernatural being, which was the majority of horror creations at the time. They focused more on very real things. Insanity, hypnosis, paranoia. They were showing things that honestly were too real and too graphic, and this is what made them be one of the most influential pieces of media and art to all extremities, horror, music, and everything of the like. But of course, we are focusing on movies today because of course we are in extreme horror movies finds its home and its roots with an exploitation film. No matter if it's violence, sex, drugs, off-the-wall subcultures, exploitation thrives on shock value. Despite their bad standing reputation of being poorly made and lowbrow, exploitation films have played a significant role in the evolution of modern film, influencing a multitude of genres and creators, and even creating the space for some of the most iconic cult films ever. And like most things that are cool, it was kind of born out of censorship. And during the 1920s, exploitation horror would take its complete flight, with a large focus on social taboos at the time, like the 1936 film Reefer Madness, which, yes, of course, we are following people who are partaken in reefer madness. Now, I bring this film up because, to me, one of the most current standing, relevant, and I think will always be around exploitation film topics is drug usage. And this stays once again in modern topics with one of the most credited extreme documentaries being the 2012 film Black Metal Veins by Lucifer Valentine, who I have no association with. Maybe we're secret cousins, who knows? In Black Metal Veins, we follow 5 people in active addiction with the obvious focus on their drug usage, as we in real time see the decline of everyone, from appearance, cognitive state, and general living conditions, until the ultimate on-screen death of Raven, one of the girls who had become the semi-focal point of the film, that earlier herself stated she understood her usage would lead to this fate. This film holds its whole, reputation for being so taboo and extreme, partially due to the fact that Lucifer is a hands-off documentarian. So he simply videotapes them, he does not involve himself, including in this movie, assaults, and of course the ultimate death of Raven. And this of course leaves a very sour taste in people's mouths surrounding this film, so it is something of quite notoriety for extreme horror junkies. By the 1960s, Exploitation films had completely evolved with rising countercultures throughout the entire country, true crime in a big heyday with the Manson cult running around, and the lack of censorship standards being upheld by the general masses. And this actually played part into indie low-budget film companies getting their start. Major motion picture companies really didn't care about playing into exploitation needs, so that it let this big hole form for lower-budget people to slide in and end up making cult classic films. And arguably one of the most notorious niches and honestly the most important part for horror history is grindhouse cinema. These would be playing in theaters across America, showing double features of low-budget, gritty films. Now, I think in modern day, most people associate Grindhouse with Tarantino or Rodriguez, which I don't know if we could see. Very, very familiar, big old fan of it. But original Grindhouse was a bit more exploitative than those films even. Originally, they were playing in American theaters that were typically run down in seedy areas, showing low-budget horror, exploitation, and lewd content. The underbelly of media at the time. And with the tickets being cheap and many running at all odd hours of the night, grindhouse media saw its thrive and height in the 60s and 70s, along with the general decline of typical theaters due to home television. Grindhouse films usually had a few common tropes: biker gangs, prisons, a lot of focus on women in very dangerous situations. Grindhouse cinema kind of pushed normal boundaries in storytelling, providing these gritty, raw cinematic experiences. But of course, Grindhouse also just was showing films that were deemed too gruesome, too intense, too extreme for the general public. So there are films that I believe to be genuine, stand-out pieces of art that technically are Grindhouse films. One of Salo Mount Rushmore's own, Mario Bava, would create one of the most influential, I can't talk right now because I'm so hyped up about this movie, one of the most influential Salo films ever to be made, fight me on it, of Blood and Black Lace. If you are unfamiliar with one of the absolute best subgenres of film ever, giallos, they are simply put as Italian horror mysteries that were made for those that wanted something more unhinged and perverse than what else was on the market at the time. They commonly feature bizarre kill scenes, amazing coloring, great scoring, large amounts of female nudity and violence, fetishistic imagery, perversion, paranoia, and of course, the genre staple of black leather gloves and a shadowy, masked, unseen, unknowing killer with a very beautiful reveal wrap-up at the end of who it was. In Blood and Black Lace, a mysterious, shadowy killer is running around a fashion house in Rome, killing models all over someone's diary. And this movie serves just as much as you think it does. It is a masterclass in extremism in its own right. The levels of eroticism, violence, and even coloring. The saturation of this film is so intense and extreme. If it was filmed any different, I think it would have come off very gaudy, horrible, and cheap. This movie is so beautiful. I am absolutely entranced by these bright red mannequins that just run around everywhere in the fashion house. Blood and Black Lace is a masterclass film. And this movie is a movie of extremities, and I want this to be part of the focus of this film, that extreme horror doesn't just have to be blood, guts, gross, weird, shocking content. Extreme horror can be extremes in all of the sense, but of course, I know you want blood and guts, so shout out Mario Bava's Bay of Blood, which, so gross. Love it. Check it out. And before we start moving away from Grindhouse, I will say a channel film staple, we can call it now with how the snuff film's going, is the 1976 film Snuff, which is absolutely a Grindhouse film, in which we follow a biker group that kind of resembles the Manson family cult in a way that turns into a fourth wall breaking depiction of so-called snuff film being created. This movie is awful, amazing. Go watch it. And if you are getting into grindhouse cinema, there is a lot of beautiful film that is outside of the atypical realm of horror. And I think the best perfect film to start your grindhouse journey is going to be Faster, Pussycat, Kill Kill. But it wasn't just this underbelly of media and movies that were pushing extremities at the time. With 1960, we saw Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho being put out into the public and winning awards, giving us the mommy issues final boss, Norman Bates, in that absolutely amazing, for the time, immensely extreme, and now iconic, unforgettable shower scene. And I know I hear you at home. You're ready. You want blood. You want guts. You want carnage. And that takes us to the subgenre of horror of splatter. Whereas many horror films focus on the fear of the unknown, ghosts and ghouls, splatter thrives on chaos and lack of structure, with a display of interest on the vulnerability of the human body and the visual drama of its utter, complete destruction. True horror of seeing with your own eyes, the mutilation of the human body, and the accompanying agony displayed visually and auditorily. Herschel Gordon Lewis, rightfully referred to as the godfather of gore, would be credited to the complete creation of splatter horror as a whole with his 1963 film Blood Feast. Particularly, Blood Feast features on a food caterer by day and also a mass killer by day. He murders women in the name of offering their body parts as a blood sacrifice to an Egyptian god, and yes, this is as probably culturally offensive as you could picture for a film from 1963. As well as he obviously feeds the human flesh and blood to the catering clients. This movie is, once again, so absolutely, insanely, horribly, amazing, immaculate, perfect, so good. So good. You have to watch this film if you want to start any form of education on gore horror. You gotta look at Herschel Gordon Lewis. I personally recommend my favorite one of his films, The Wizard of Gore, in which a magician essentially just mutilates and kills people. It is so horrible. It is so amazing. I urge you to look at this man's entire discography of film. Now, although Herschel is credited, rightfully so, as the godfather of gore, and credited for the creation of splatter horror, I think we definitely have to give the props and focus on a film from 3 years before in 1960 coming from Japan, Jigoku, also known as The Sinners of Hell. No movie release came close to showing the vast amount of blood and gore shown in Jigoku. To put it simply, it depicts what happens to sinners that die in actual Buddhist hell. It gives a very slow, suspenseful play out where we know something horrid is awaiting us, but we just don't know yet. And we don't know what it is until it's far too late. And this film does not hold back. It shows people being sawed in half, covered in blood and pus, hot oil thrown on them. It gives visual displays of the likes of Euronymous Bosch's depictions of hell. And these movies did nothing short of shocking the public just as much as it did as entertaining them, causing fits of outrage at times, but was also coveted. Blood Feast got almost $7 million in the box office. The public wanted carnage just as much as they denounced it as tasteless filth. Like that period of time in the 2000s where the box offices were being dominated by this coined subgenre turn of gore corn, like Eli Roth's Hostel and the Saw trilogies. Time after time in history, horror thrives during times of unrest, uncertainty, and even when own horrors are taking place within the country as an outlet of art and expression. Horror has been and always will be political, and I want everyone to take that home with them no matter how much some guy who made a clown tells you otherwise. In cases of extremities, splatter and gore can truly be used in a form of art and beauty. I think the whole relation of so-called gore corn can overshadow this to the general masses and invalidate true spectacles of art. And one of my favorite movies to showcase how you can use gore, torture, guts, literal human depravity on film in a mean of arts is the 2008 film Martyrs. It's a combination of gruesome gore and potent storytelling about two young girls who survived a brutal childhood and are set on getting their revenge on those who did so. But one of the girls ultimately falls into madness with full hallucinations and goes on a killing spree of the people who hurt them. Martyrs is a showcase of intense torture and human suffering, as much as it also takes us in and out of feelings of hopelessness and total, complete transcendence. And when I say showcase torture, I mean it. From psychological, spiritually, physically, full metal cage, skin ripped, fusings being pulled off, self-mutilation, and an entire full body flaying. Martyrs puts on a pedestal the physical destruction of the human body, psyche, and spirit, along with its own strength. Displaying true visceral human depravity on screen can possibly remind us of the level of humanity we truly hold, which can oddly realign yourself and stand as a sense of purification in a way. or it's just the wallowment of pure disgust and filth and depravity and hatred the human form and human beings can put onto themselves and others. Pick your poison. Are you an optimist or a pessimist? That's truly it, or are you just here to eat some popcorn and watch some blood spill? Either way, Martyrs stands out as arguably a perfect film. As I mentioned, the rise of splatter is met with strong and powerful negative reactions, particularly in the US and the UK, where a lot were being produced at the time, leading to, of course, censorship. Robert Elbert of the US and Graham Bright in the UK led the movement to censor splatter films on home video, starting with the focus on the revenge film I Spit on Your Grave. Which, fun fact, the model for the original I Spit on Your Grave cover was Demi Moore. I found that out recently, and I think that is so super neat. This then led to the sponsoring of the Video Recordings Act, a system for censoring home videos in the UK, outright banning a large majority of films, deeming them and unintentionally creating this new genre and term that could not be any more perfect, such as video nasties. I can't get enough of that term. I think it is so fun to call a movie a video nasty. I think that's why I'm going to start calling my videos when people ask me, like, no, I make video nasties. Due to this new act implemented by Parliament, productions large and small were heavily censored or outright banned from home release. No one was exempt from this. Even movies released in the UK previous to the act, like The Exorcist, Texas Chainsaw, and even Evil Dead, were forced to either heavily censor and edit their films or not be allowed to release. And at times, certain films would say, cool, let's edit this down, and they still would not allow their release. This actually led to this very large movement in the UK of bootlegging film. There's a lot of people who discuss about how their dad would have this dude who would pull up with a bunch of VHS tapes, and it would be a bunch of bootleg copies of banned films in the UK, or it would just be the uncut versions. This created this big boom of subculture of bootlegging, which is its own entire deep dive as a whole. But my father is from Ireland, lived in Ireland and stuff, and this man, I'm sure he still bootlegs now. I haven't checked up on it, but this man was bootlegging at least up until 2015. It created an entire culture in the UK surrounding bootlegging movies and media. A major form of censorship had overtaken their media as a whole. With the government, video nasties were credited for influencing the spree shooting in which 16 people died, which we now know there's no definitive evidence of violent content causing violent behavior. Graham Bright, who I mentioned earlier, even once stated that, quote, research is taking place and it will show that these films not only affect young people, but I believe dogs as well, unquote. I am so surprised my dog has not attacked me after how many times we sit through watching Fauci films. Now, one of, if not the best video nasties to ever be labeled is the 1981 film Possession. I know a lot of people were bummed I didn't mention it in the Femcell horror video. This is its time to shine, baby. If you are not familiar with Possession, you're about to be so intrigued. I urge you to watch this. This movie is quite diverse. You either really love it or hate it, but by God, will it make you feel something. I know recently a lot of GIFs have been going around in edits on TikTok surrounding the infamous subway scene of this film. If you have seen this, that's Possession, baby. Putting it very simply, we're following the separation and infidelity of a wife and husband who have a child, which, by the way, I know I keep interrupting me explaining this movie, but by God, is this one of the most neglected children in film history. We essentially see a complete, true descent of madness for the wife, Anna, including an entire tentacle monster creation that she will kill to hide from others. We see the total destruction of the entire family unit, from mental decline and anguish to the creation of this monster becoming a doppelganger and the complete death of everyone involved. This film is truly an emotional gut punch to your core, and eventually, by the third act, it is an insane ride into the true lengths of human despair and hatred and anger. We see Mark trying to do just about anything to have his wife back, and as more as he tries to have her, the more we see her just completely fall into outright madness, erratic, crazy behavior. I think it is one of the most compelling displays of the breakdown of a relationship between two individuals. And I do believe the director at the time was going through his divorce while making this film. And there's a lot of stuff in this movie that is like really potent storytelling. The fact that we are seeing this couple separate when they live right at the Berlin Wall. I get upset. A lot of people I don't get upset, but like people really group this in as like an extreme, perverse, disgusting film. And I think this is such a beautiful, insane, gut-wrenching storytelling of the separation between two individuals. Of course, he uses insane storytelling means, but that's what makes this so compelling. Without the actress who plays Anna's total breakdown in the subway we see, which we later learn is a miscarriage, and without this, like, so many portrayals of women in horror would not exist. There is no way this was not at least some sort of influential means to the acting of Lily Depp in Nosferatu. Like, this was one of the best, most real, carnal depictions of female anguish, I think, to ever grace the screen. And all this has a bunch of allegories. She's having the miscarriage, she's smashing eggs, things like that. But Possession stands as one of the best physical representations of selfishness, grease, abjection, total desecration of individuals as a complete whole. And of course, if you're into that thing, yeah, she smashes a tentacle monster, so go watch Possession. But on the more common theme of extreme, nasty horror with video nasties would be, as I aforementioned, the film Faces of Death. Featuring a pathologist named Francis B. Gross as he takes us through his collection of death footage. The real get of Faces of Death, as many people know, is that the series is partially real. And by that I mean about 60% of the death footage is from newsreels, wars, and previous documentaries. Viewers will be exposed to grainy footage of corpses, animal cruelty, accidents, and execution. And having this blend, it kind of makes it seem all completely real. To this day, I think one of the top searches surrounding this movie is it real? And to be fair, once again, about 60% of it is real. I actually only recently found out this whole film wasn't real. I've been going my whole life believing this was essentially like a mass-distributed mixtape, but that is not the case, and this completely led to a whole franchise of Faces of Death, and I believe this film now has a cult-like status. It's even been referenced on The Sopranos. Faces of Death is one of the cases of exploitation horror becoming a so-called staple. If horror movies are anything, they're typically a reflection of the current culture and its adversity. The worse day-to-day becomes, the more extremities in horror appeal to the general audience. And of course, the British would claim that up until the 90s, they never loosened their stance on materials, but it's quite obvious this was not the case. And since we're kind of following this vague timeline I'm keeping, we're working our way down up to the 80s, in which slashers are the rage, baby. And a lot of people put Hellraiser into extreme horrors, but I think we should focus on more niche and more extreme horrors, like one of my unfortunately favorite films, the 1980 film Maniac. Renowned for being cheap, exploitative, and far too much, Maniac stands out as a slasher like no other. Objectively, we're following a man in New York with mommy issues, which is 90% of the dating pool out here, and he then in turns murders, scalps, and steals the fingernails of women to put on his mannequins at home, which is the other 10% of the dating pool out here. It's an ugly and uncomfortable showing of the focus on the killer, less so his victims that was much more prevalent for slashers at the time. We see his sexual prowling and violent impulses. Just a true, genuine, feel-bad movie all the way up until the ending. There's this balance of over-the-top melodrama backstory of an abusive mother turning into a total, grungy, unnecessary, detailed mutilation of random innocent women. This film could have been chucked into the B-list of slasher films during the craze, but there is something special of Maniac, that it thrives on its absolute depravity and insanity within the film, and of course, Tom Savini's amazing, beautiful special effects for the film. There is no one like Tom Savini. There is a reason he is the man with effects, and I think Maniac is a really beautiful showcase of his work. And there's one movie that I now kind of correlate with Maniac in my head, that, believe it or not, a man trying to court me recommended this film. It is the 2012 movie Found. This is arguably the film with the most vicious and extreme depictions of homicidal necrophilia and necromutulomania I think that's been put on the screen arguably, possibly ever. Found revolves around a 12-year-old boy named Marty coming to terms with the fact his older brother Steve is a serial killer. finding a new woman's head in a bowling bag week after week. Later in the film, Marty's mother takes him to Blockbuster to rent a film for him and his friend to watch at a sleepover. He attempts to rent the film called Headless, only to find out that the tape is missing. Later on, Marty goes into Steve's bedroom and he finds the tape for Headless, along with timestamps included. The two kids put the tape on. It witnessed some of the most intense, homicidal, necrophilic content involving even... listen, I'm sure there's other films that have this, but I've only seen this in depictions of girl, like, drawings. This film has full reverse J shots. I don't know how to say this on this without getting in trouble. Reverse J shots. I was shocked the first time I saw this film. It is so intense in the homicidal necrophilia. And that's coming from, like, Necro Queen over here. Like, it is, whoa, it is so intense. Like, genuinely, if this is something that would see the camera shook, it's that intense. If this is something that possibly upset you, I urge you to read the synopsis of this film. This goes on for probably like a 5-minute sequence, but it is absolutely insane to view. And this film was definitely like a lower budget creation, and whoever did the effects, hats off to you. The effects in this film are absolutely great. And of course, this film ends to transcend into a total homicide showcase of just killing everyone. This movie's crazy. Like, I'm really trying to give you guys, like, really good synopsises, but this is one of the few movies that I've only seen it once. Cause it's crazy. It's so crazy. What's crazier is the fictional film in the movie Headless, they later went on to actually produce it. And that movie, I've also only seen once because it takes this and kind of pushes it to the extreme. There is, like, this entire corpse pit with the killer in there, and he is... I don't know if I could tell you what's happening in these movies. Oh my god, they are just so intense and insane to view. And we're talking about extreme slashers, so of course I have to talk to you about the Terrifier franchise. And before I lose a majority of my fan base over what I am about to discuss surrounding Terrifier, I want to first off say, these films are putting out some of the best practical special effects we have possibly ever seen on film. Everyone who works on this is an artist, deserves respect, credit, all of the above. The kills in these movies are absolutely immaculate. The effects are immaculate. The guy who plays Art is great. His character design is awesome. There's a reason Terrifier is as popular and prevalent as it is. I think Terrifier 2 is one of the worst written movies I have possibly ever had to sit through. Yup. And once again, all the kills in all of these movies are absolutely immaculate. Genuinely. And I think the guy who plays Art does a phenomenal job. He truly will be on a Mount Rushmore of someday, as long as their creator doesn't keep screwing it up for everyone. I'm gonna tell you my issues with these films now. Minor Darby rant. I will get back to being very educational to you in a minute. I'm gonna keep this quick. These films garner no value. The first one's pretty good. I don't mind the first one. The first one's fine. These films garner no value more than a kill compilation for me. I believe there is no plot. I feel like every new movie, we're just completely just wasting our time with characters, and now we're trying to establish characters. Why does it take 4 movies for me to just find out a crumb? Something about the dad, something about Art, something about someone. I do not want to sit through 4 movies. I think there is this big thing of people not wanting to make exploitation or extreme horror. People feel like they have to put some sort of plot, story, or substance into the film. I personally don't feel that way. If you are here to make a killer kill compilation, give me a killer kill compilation. I don't want to sit through fake plot. I don't want to do all this nonsense for no reason. And these films truly are actually good if you only watch the kill scenes. So I just have this big issue surrounding, like, I don't want to do all this play pretend. Just give me gruesome content. Don't pretend that you're giving me a story as well. Because there's no reason for, even if we get the story in the 4th one, to actually, like, have a plot. Just kill people. Please, I'm begging you, just brutally kill people. Because Terrifier 1, the scene of that woman getting cut in half, will stand as one of the most iconic pieces of horror media in a few decades from now. This will be up there with the likes of Freddy Krueger kills and things of that nature. This film is amazing and iconic. I just have a lot of issues with the writing throughout the entirety of the franchise of these films. But with the absolute sensation of Terrifier, it once again speaks to the fact that when we are at times of uncertainty and fear, horror is a craving, a need even for the public, a form of release. And with how graphic these kills are in the Terrifier franchise, I think we could possibly argue it to be the most extreme slasher franchise. And as I mentioned earlier, Asian horror is one of the most important continents for the genre as a whole. So many of the best horror films come out of Asia, and they themselves would be credited with the creation of the extreme cinema label as a whole. The term extreme cinema comes from a line of Asian films that contain things like extreme violence and horror, as well as a very shocking storyline. And even at times, still to this day, you'll see some of these films labeled explicitly as Asian extreme, and this can be as light as the films like Grudge or Ringu, a personal favorite of mine, Battle Royale. It is without doubt some of the most disgusting, depraved, extreme horror movies do come out of Asia. Like the extreme realm of the Guinea Pig franchise that is so intense and extreme, it has been investigated personally by the US FBI as well as Japanese officials to confirm that they are fictional films with just how real and disgusting these translate onto screen. If you watch my stuff video, you would know that Charlie Sheen actually viewed Guinea Pig 2, Flowers of Flesh and Blood, and called the FBI thinking he had his hands on a real snuff tape. In particular, the first 1985 Guinea Pig focuses on a group of men who have kidnapped a woman and proceed to torture her in the most vile means possible, with each segment of the film being labeled and separated by their means of attack, from hit and kick, all the way to guts and needle. We see maggots thrown on her, fingernails ripped off, and ultimately, as shown on the box art, a needle shoved within her eye, appearing to lead to her demise. The film ends with text on screen implying what we just saw is some sort of found experimental footage, as it's called Guinea Pig Devil's Experiment. It's implying that we just saw a real torture video, so a lot of people that saw these films believe them to be as such. And I don't think any franchise has the notoriety of how intense and extreme they are, like Guinea Pig does. This even led to, in typical J-horror fashion, American remakes being made, so there's even a film called American Guinea Pig. But in total, every single Guinea Pig movie is just as vile as the last one, if not almost amping it up every single film. But there is one man I am beyond comfortable labeling as the god of extreme J-horror as a complete whole, Takashi Miike. From Ichi the Killer to Audition to his standout short film imprint, has one of the most insane and kind of hot torture scenes ever. But there is a film Takashi did that thrives on extremities outside of any gore and torture he had showed us on screen before, with its absolute insane, disgusting depravity, and that is his 2001 film Visitor Q. And I'm preemptively sorry about how artsy-fartsy talking I'm going to get to you about this film, because as disgusting, depraved, and highly coveted as viscerally horrible film Visitor Q is, I personally see the absolute artistry he put onto film with this. And I think this is a good warm-up before we get into our heavy hitters after this section of Salo and Serbian. So I once again come to you and tell you I'm about to discuss even more extreme, explicit, disgusting details. Most of this part and forward will have a large focus on SA, CSAM, things of that nature. If those are things that upset you, I urge you to click off of this video. I will see you in the next one. Thank you for making it here. And if you're sticking around with me, Godspeed, you little freak. Let's get into it. Visitor Q is a focus on abjection. It centers around a visitor coming into a family system, a father who's a documentarian, a mother who's abusing drugs from the abuse of her son and family, a son bullied for his father who takes it out on his mother, and a daughter working as a 304. The film simply starts with a question. Have you ever done it with your dad? You see the daughter proposition the father to pay her for this said act, which he does and tapes for his work. This becomes a focal point of the theme, the voyeurism of the father through his work, a form of attempting to retain or gain some type of power within the world, obsessed with the spectacle of his own violation, just doing the polar opposite of his intended need, showing him as weak, spineless, easily to manipulate and push to things. The visitor himself is the physical manifestation of an intrusive thought and being. Any and every destructive end of a choice he begins the encouragement of the family with, giving into absolute dark impulses. Pressing the abjection with the father choosing to not protect his family, but cheering on the absolute destruction of it. The son beating the mother, and the perverse relationship created between father and daughter. Ultimately, with a clear distinction of the topic of life and death culminating into the visitor teaching the mother to lactate for the perversions of her family, where normally leads to pregnancy, that leads to breastfeeding, turning into an act of innocence, and purity, and caring, and feeding of a child. Visitor Q flips it onto its head, showing lactation as providing eroticism and the sick perversions of it for being for the family itself. Visitor Q is a focus on the violation of the body, directly in the acts of assault, but also metaphorically by the structure of the family, and even the house as itself being a physical representation of the family as we see its destruction throughout the film, mainly caused by the actions of the family that lives within it. This is later contrasted by the necrophilia performed by the father, showing him penetrated and being forcibly incorporated into the body, when he is stuck within it. And of course, as we've seen throughout this entire film, his attempt to dominate and once again failure to do so for himself, showing what a submissive, weak man to the world he just truly is. This film is so disgusting and pointedly so. This does have a sense and a reason. If you're absolutely insane, at least. To me and Takashi, like, I get it. I get this movie. As super disgusting and horrible as it is, I get it. This film weaves between abjections and family in a form of metaphorical body horror, with the boundaries and relationships being penetrated and destroyed from within and without. Interlocking of life and death within the finale of breast milk and necrophilia, along with the nonsensical theming. This stands as one of the best physical representations of Uraguro Nonsensu, which we're gonna do a video on that. Don't worry, I'm just trying to figure out how I can have that on here and not get in trouble. But it is nonsensical, erotic nastiness. And this is a perfect movie to describe abjection to you. And abjection is one of my favorite topics. It is this force of nature that we as humans are compelled to participate in. And Visitor Q is one of the most disgusting films to be made in the most potent, perfect, needed way of storytelling. This movie is a piece of art. As much as it is disgusting, vile, perverse, lowbrow, it is something that speaks in a way of storytelling that I find so absolutely captivating. And I think the desecration of family dynamics is something that is prevalent throughout the entirety of extreme horror, because this is something that is seen as sacred and coveted within human nature. You are supposed to have sanctity within your family and the dynamic of it and its existence of it. So the thought of the destruction and perversion of it is something that is so appalling to the general audience and public and people that it is one of the most powerful tools storytellers can use, because it also has this sense of non-escapism. You are in this. This is your family. You have nowhere to go. You have this sense of loyalty unwavering, and to have it destroyed and perverse and just absolutely just torn apart is something that is so powerful emotionally, visually, and physically for people. Like we saw in Possession, that is the destruction of a relationship and a family. Part of it is how neglected that child is by the couple, which, later he gets taken out too. The whole entire family dynamic thing is something you will see without the entirety of extreme horror, and one of another film that I think is absolutely perfect at showing how this is something to be preyed upon for storytelling in this way is the 1997 Austrian film Funny Games. Now, the first time I actually saw this film was on accident. I was watching something on some streaming platform, and it's probably something horrible, so started auto-playing this movie right after, and I had never heard of it, no intention of seeing it, and you quickly see just how disgusting and disturbing this film is. It once again focuses on the intrusion of an outsider. In this case, two teenage boys who show up to the doorstep of a family and start an attack of senseless, terrifying, violent, and disturbing attacks on the entirety of the family. Between killing the family dog, forcing the mother to strip down just to scare everyone and put her clothes back on, and just playing these weird, crazy psychological games with everyone, not knowing what is going to happen next. I think a really cool part of this film and its storytelling is the fact that one of the boys breaks the fourth wall constantly to us. he will turn and just start talking to us through the lens of the camera. It makes us feel complicit in the action in a way. We are sitting here watching them force the family to participate in physical and psychological torture. And when we're confronted with the fact that that is exactly and explicitly what we are doing by watching this film, it gives this extra sense of grime onto the person, that you are being acknowledged by the people in this film. You're being acknowledged in viewing the absolute degradation and torture of a family. And that definitely pushes you to feel a type of way. And part of what makes this movie obviously so disgusting and horrible, and this was very groundbreaking for the time, way before The Strangers ever did it, is the fact that these two boys are attacking this family for fun. Genuinely. They don't know them. They have no reason to do this. They show up, do this, leave, and go do to another family. Same exact tactic. And it kind of implies, again, funny games. This is a fun game for them. This is what these boys do. They thrive on just genuinely, psychologically, mentally, physically breaking down an entire family structure. And once again, that's part of what makes this so horrible, you know, seeing parents have to see their children get killed or like participate in hurting their kids. This is something that is, once again, sacred and pure to most people. So the absolute destruction of it is it's horrible. It's horrible. It's nerve-wracking. It's crazy to see with your own eyes. And with that, the destruction of a family, let's do it. Let's talk about it. In 2010, a film by the literal name of a Serbian film was released and banned in about 46 countries. It is said to be a way to project the feelings the director had about Serbia and its political climate. I once again stand on the side of I do not believe in censorship. I don't. I think it is something that we don't need. And, you know, I also think not everything needs to be created or fledged out. And that puts you in this really slippery gray area surrounding topics, media, creation of non-censorship, but also, is this something that needs to be created and released and have a physical entity? And honestly, that's kind of how the world is. If you have comprehensive thinking, at least, or critical thinking, is nothing's black and white. And that puts you in this very weird situation. And I think a Serbian film is that gray, weird situation where I don't believe in banning films. I believe people should be expressing themselves. But do I advocate for this film and think this was something that necessarily needs to be made? I personally do not. But there are plenty of people that argue the case that it is. Serbia saw multiple economic depressions, in the worst one in particular happening the year before the production of this film started, still feeling the complete effects of a war that hadn't even ended a decade prior. The premise of the film is a semi-retired adult star, Milos, who is struggling to support his wife and child, this being a representation of the people in Serbia fighting to exist. He is contracted to participate in an art-style adult film by a man named Vukmir, who is the representation of the state, of the government, and those who should not be corrupted, but at their core choose quite the opposite of just corruption, greed, everything to get whatever they want, and they do not care about the general public. Milos starring the film would set him up with enough money to not worry about supporting his family and leave the industry, a deal way too good to be true. I personally do not find value in me verbally breaking down and explaining this film to you, and I'll be totally honest with you, I don't want to. This film is readily accessible to view or read synopsises, breakdowns, all of the above about. If you want to know the nitty-gritty details of this film, you can go do that yourself. I will now tell you, partially outlining what vaguely kind of occurs that is so upsetting and why this film stands within infamy of being one of the worst, most extreme, disturbing films ever made. It revolves around Milos being forced to compromise his moral standing for the films involving CSAM, involving strangers and ultimately his own family, including his own son, at the hands of his brother, on film for this art style house film situation he's doing. It has one of the most disgusting and vile reveals of all time, and ends with the absolute total annihilation of Milos and his family in their family bed altogether. And the final line of this movie is the Vukmir or whatever stating to the camera crew that is there, because we now see this has all been very documented for this film. The last words in this film are "start with the little one." This movie is disgusting, vile, and you know what? That's the reason he made this, genuinely. He's stated after the creation of this film, he thinks it wasn't as extreme as it could be. Because once again, this is political commentary on his own feelings about Serbia at the time, and I think this movie will always stand within infamy because it is probably the most explicit visual representation of the creation of CSAM and things revolving that entire nature and world. Like, it's gross. It's gross. It's gross. It's a deeply disturbing film that even some of the most hardcore extreme fans struggle to finish. But at the same time, because of its notoriety, it has reached a cult-like status in its own right. It's avid fans of the film who either advocate for the metaphorical nature of the storytelling on the censorship of the artistic creations coming out of the country, or just the typical trolling shock crowd. And you know, it does create an interesting point of thought and discussion surrounding how far is too far to make a point. And can you really deem things as not valid political statements and or art? And we once again see how horror is a focus on political rhetoric at times, and you know, we're already knee-deep in the heavy hitters in political films. So let's get into it. There is a very, very famous film known as Salo, or at times 120 Days of Sodom. Salo takes use of Marc de Sade's extreme text and adapts it into the horror of Nazi-occupied Italy in 1944. Now, Marc de Sade, if you're unfamiliar with him, is the man that the word sadist was created after. He was absolutely deprived, little filthy, nasty little freak. And there's like this whole urban legend type story surrounding 120 Days of Sodom, and that a lot of the text for this movie was stuff that was found rolled up in the wall of Marc de Sade's room because he was like in a psychiatric facility because of how disgusting and crazy he was. And they took a lot of the text, which they do use his text like verbatim a lot within this film. He was absolutely, without a doubt, a giant source of inspiration with this film, along with the Divine Comedy, Dante's Inferno, the Circles of Hell and such. This film is, at its core, disgusting and deprived, and that is what it absolutely thrives on. A group of fascists in power, knowing everything is closing in on them, round up a group of teenagers, forcing them to engage in disgusting acts of degradation and depravity against their will, as death as the consequence otherwise. Young men and women are forced to submit to insane cruelty, essay, murder, humiliation, and of course, coprophilia, which is, this is, I think, why the film is so notorious, if I'm honest, is the mass amount of coprophilia. Coprophilia, I don't know if I'm saying it right. I'll be so real, guys. I don't care if I am, because it is nasty. It is so gross. I have seen this film 4 times now. Never by myself, for the record, okay? I'm not, listen, not that. And I think this is what makes it so hard for people to watch, because the entire second act surrounds that, essentially. First time I tried to watch this was with one of my exes on Thanksgiving. He made us turn it off and tapped out around this time, which is totally fair. Don't blame him, but it is a tough watch, if I'm honest. Don't eat while watching this film. The visceral acts of violence and violation on the captive teens are used as a force to feed the machine, accompanied by the storytelling of aging SWs about their time of taboo boundary breaking within their life's work. The film is regarded for its artistry, and to be fair, there are shots that are set up beautifully, truly being within its own version of Circles of Hell, set up with the 3 acts labeled as the Circle of Obsessions, the Circle of, and the Circle of Blood. It's a war film told in the form of exploitative shock, which causing it to be easily overlooked in its reasoning due to the practice, nature, and disgust this film evokes. And how I discussed earlier about movies focusing on the desecration of a family dynamic, and that's part of its horror. Salo in particular, I think, really focuses on the desecration of marriage. There's a lot of scenes with wedding dresses and, you know, making 2 of the kids get married, and then the fascists in charge getting dressed up to get married and do weddings. The film starts with weddings, and that plays throughout the whole thing. And I think it is part of their perversion, and they get off to this whole desecration thing. They get off to, like, destroying things. Obviously, they're fascists. And them destroying the whole sanctity of marriage is absolutely seen throughout this film. They also love to get in drag in this movie, low-key. Like, the dolls are dolling. It's kind of crazy, but this film does have... I'm trying to argue this film has artistic merit. Listen, I already sat here and rode for Visitor Q, which was insane of me. That was insane of me to ride for that movie like that. But, like, there are shots in this that are really beautiful and, like, visceral and great to watch. Like, there is some level of artistic merit within this film. I genuinely think so. And the costuming's beautiful. I really love how certain things are laid out and how they do it. And having this mass amount of people kind of fuels just how intense this film gets. And, yeah, no, it is a movie about people eating you know what, but, like, God, there is something about this film. Once again, abjection surrounding everything involving extreme horror, and I think that's part of the reason I have such this, like, perversion to it, is because it's just, like, it's just insane. It's insane stuff, let's be so real, team. Like, it's just, yeah. And it is absolutely worth mentioning that the man who made this film was killed probably a week after its release. A lot of people say he was killed for making this film. Personally, when looking into it myself, they don't know who killed him. At first, a 17-year-old boy claimed he killed him for assaulting him, and he did have a documented history of assaulting underage teenage boys, which then kind of says, is this actually just a really nefarious movie he made? This isn't political commentary on fascists in Italy, because he himself lived through World War II. And that was a part of the reason he wanted to create this film. It's kind of up in the air on all of that, but there is a level of artistry and beauty, and in reasoning, the dog just opened the door and scared the crap out of me. There is a level of artistry within this film. It shows the true horror of war as a whole, and how it strips people of identity, safety, and personal autonomy. And extreme horror is not going anywhere. Between being used as social or political commentary, or to feed the masses that crave more, this is still a thriving genre, and as I've lined out here, has been for decades, if not a century at this point. I think a lot of this can be assisted with how bleak the real world is, and how desensitized some are to violence on screen, so amping it up is almost necessary. And I think one of the best focuses on just extreme torture for extreme torture. There is no value of story, there's no plot, there's nothing but genuine horrifying imagery on screen, is the August Underground franchise. These are filmed kind of POV found footage style, which I think absolutely assists to the horror of these films and making it feel almost real, of two serial killers traveling and just killing, kidnapping, torturing, just genuinely doing, like, the worst things they could possibly do, and videotaping it for fun, between kidnapping random people from stores, just going into an old woman's house and killing her. Like, these films are so depraved and disgusting, and, like, they don't hold back. Like, the first one opens with going in the basement and, like, rubbing excrement into the wounds of someone they have tied up that they've been torturing for days as they're dismembering her boyfriend in the bathtub. Like, these movies are true disgust torture films, and they do them in a way, like, they do their job. That's the thing. They do their job. And I have no issues with films like this being created. I think stuff like this is always going to be around. There's always some level of extremities and disgust and depravity. With that, I will say, obviously, there is something wrong in my head that I am so fascinated and obsessed with macabre, morbid, disgusting, vile, atypical things. This channel as proof. But I also think there is this sense of, curiosity killed the cat, satisfaction brought back. But sometimes satisfaction isn't needed. Sometimes it puts a hole in you. It fills you with bad feelings, bad thoughts, things of that nature. And I love watching messed up stuff. I love macabre extremities, but I think you need to do so within reason. I don't think this is all you need to be consuming. I don't think you need to even consume some of it. It is such a hard spot to be in, because it's been proven that seeing extreme content lights up receptors in your brain, positive and negative. And, you can get rushes from things like this. And this can, become almost addictive to your brain, especially with how we feel nowadays. I feel like a lot of people are running around very numb. So if you can get a rush from something, no matter what it is, you're kind of intrigued by it. And I just want to urge everyone to watch things within reason. Don't lose yourself within things. Always hold on to your empathy. I know that's very hard nowadays. It's extremely hard to be empathetic nowadays, but I think that's one of the most important things a human can be. And it is hard to watch torture for hours on end and to, go outside and look at everyone like totally normal. So, you know, I'm just saying, watch these within reason. Explore extremities within reason as well for your own safety and sanity. But of course, explore it. I believe in the exploration. I believe in people being curious. It is literally my driving force in my existence, almost, is curiosity. And will that be my demise? Probably. But just, I don't want people to play like Tough Guy Olympics in the comments, because I already know that's happening. Anytime you mention any of these films, it is Tough Guy Olympics and like, oh, I watch Serbian film every day. Cool. Like, you're scaring the hose. Like, you know what I mean? Like, okay, and, like, make sure to step away from things like this. Do things that make you happy. Be around people that make you happy. Okay? That's all I'm saying. Okay? Watch things with extremities within reason. And I'm sure you're at home and you're upset I didn't mention your favorite extreme films. Begotten, Grotesque, Vomit Slaughter Dolls, Fetus, Dumplings, you know, all of the above. But I wanted to take a focus on, you know, heavy hitters, historical ones that I think, you know, they exist for a reason, they need to be discussed for a reason, and I'm not saying other ones don't, because I do have a letterbox down below where I have a list of, I think it's about 30 to 40 extreme horror films, ones I discuss here, ones I didn't discuss here, so make sure to check that out. I also have a J Horror Essentials but J Horror Essentials letterbox list as well, because J Horror is one of the driving forces within horror, as well as Asian horror as a whole. Shout out to the Korean film, The Butcher. It is a POV style snuff creation film. Absolutely insane stuff over there. Don't sleep on Korean horror. They are insane. It's so good. But yeah, that was essentially a deep dive, a small history, an exploration, a little creeping into extreme horror as much as I can for a YouTube video, because baby, I could sit here with you for 6 hours and talk about this, and that's, you know, that's just too much. And I also, again, I don't find value in me, like, sitting here and really just, like, explicitly play telling you everything. So, you know, go watch these movies if you want to watch these movies. Once again, watch them within reason for your own well-being. And I want to say thank you, everyone who's watching the channel. I have picked up again. Y'all are the best. I always appreciate it. Members, you mean the most. Members see videos early. You can become a member. I have a link down below. It's also on the channel as a whole. I also would like to take the time to announce, when I hit 25K, we will be doing a live movie showing together of Night of the Living Dead. So make sure to subscribe, hit the comment section, leave me anything about extreme horror movies. Do you have interest in them? Do you have no interest? Have you seen any of these movies, and what do you think about them? I would love to see the reception of movies, especially in particular Visitor Q, because I think it is just known as a depraved, disgusting horror film. And I, for some reason, find art within it. So let me know if you feel the same way or if you don't down below. Once again, thanks for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. Make sure to hit the notification bell. Follow me on all social media platforms under Darby Valentine. I will have them all linked down below. If you like this video, you might like my video about human cannibalism. With that, I will see you next time. Please, please, please do what is best for you. But at the end of the day, go watch a messed up movie. Bye.